In Peru, hundreds of people took to the streets in several cities to demand new elections and the release of the former president, Pedro Castillo. Uganda received a shipment of the Ebola trial vaccines to curb the current Ebola outbreak. And also, Lebanon's parliament failed to elect the nation's president for the 9th time. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada, and these are the news. Thousands of people took to the streets in several Peruvian cities on Thursday to demand new elections and the release of former President Pedro Castillo. One of the main gathering points was the central square in Chora, Cajamarca, where a large group of demonstrators marched to show their support to the ousted President Castillo. The regional central of peasant patrols of Cajamarca summoned its members to show support for Castillo, and the entity announced that they will go to Lima to participate in the next demonstrations. The leaders also informed that this protest measure will not only take place in Chora, but also in several provinces of the Cajamarca region. Meanwhile, on Thursday, in the Peruvian capital Lima, police violently repressed hundreds of protesters who were marching towards Parliament. Law enforcement used tear gas against the crowd and arrested at least 3 demonstrators. There were also similar mobilizations in the southern Andean cities of Ayacucho and Puno. The demonstrators denounced the illegitimacy of the Congress and demanded that Castillo fulfill his constitutional mandate. We move on to other topics. The people of Venezuela mobilized on Thursday as part of the commemorative activities for the Day of Love and Loyalty, 10 years after the leader of the Bolivarian Revolution, Hugo Chavez, gave his last speech after his illness was diagnosed. Demonstrators grouped in diverse social and political organizations toured the cities of Caracas to reach the mountain barracks, where the remains of Comandante Chavez rest. Numerous leaders recalled the last speech where Chavez outlined 10 years ago the strategy to continue what he called the definitive independence. President Nicolás Maduro Moros, who led the mobilization, highlighted the impact of Comandante Chavez not only nationally but also internationally.
None of us never ever thought that such a situation could occur in a historical process as beautiful and with such an emotional and political impact as a revolutionary process in Venezuela, which is not only the historical revolutionary process of Venezuela, it is a worldwide, continental impact that the Bolivarian and socialist revolution of the 21st century, founded by our commander Chavez, has had on the peoples and leaders of the world.
The Venezuelan president made reference to the latest event in the Republic of Peru. He denounced that Pedro Castillo was the target of the parliamentary, political, and judicial prosecution.
From the first moment of the election, they do not want to recognize his triumph. They belittle his triumph. In the end, and forced by reality, they have to recognize his triumph as president. And once he is sworn in on July the 28th, 2021, the conspiracy for a parliamentary coup begins and the attack, the attrition begins. Votes of censure against the ministers, against the heads of the cabinet, a permanent harassment until they took him blow by blow, acting relentlessly in a parliamentary, political, and judicial persecution without limit. They absolutely cornered him.
The Argentinian government has filed a formal complaint against judges, Buenos Aires officials, and Clarín Group business persons who share a trip to Lake Escondido. The Minister of Justice, Martín Soria, presented the case at the Federal Prosecutor's Office of Bariloche, where there was already an indictment for another case. 6 of these persons are accused of non-compliance with the duties of a public official and corruption. In the complaint, the government also confiscated the cell phones of all those involved in a visit to the property of the British tycoon Joe Louis in Lake Escondido, Bariloche, last October. On Thursday, Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel Bermudez concluded his official Caribbean tour. President Díaz-Canel visited St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Barbados, Dominica, and Grenada, with the aim of promoting bilateral relations with Caribbean nations. The Cuban head of state discussed collaboration agreements in agriculture, health, infrastructure, education, environment, climate change, among others. He also headed his national delegation in the 8th CARICOM-Cuba Summit. President Miguel Díaz-Canel reaffirmed that during his visit, he verified the truth of the legacy of Commander-in-Chief Fidel Castro Ruz in the special relationship that he established with the Caribbean countries. And with a growing cholera outbreak, increasing levels of food insecurity, and violence spreading throughout Haiti, a top United Nations official asked for more support to assist the Caribbean country.
Continues to be a worry for the country and for us. Cases continue to rise, and you have now 283 people that have died from the illness, and we also have close to 12,000 people that have been hospitalized during this period. So this is since 2nd October. And we have also close to more than 14,000 now suspected cases of cholera throughout the country. And what we are seeing, in fact, is not only the continued increase of cholera cases, but also the spread to the regions. And there is now in 8 of the 10 departments, there are confirmed cholera cases, and this is a worrying trend for us and for the country.
Let's take a short break, but first, remember you can follow us on our TikTok account at TeleSUR English, in which you will be able to see news in different formats, news, updates, and more. Other stories coming up, stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Young women diagnosed with breast cancer in the United States often delay pregnancy for years while they take hormone-blocking pills, but there is hope for them. A reassuring new study found they can take a 2-year break from these drugs to get pregnant without raising their short-term risk of cancer coming back. Results were discussed on Thursday at the San Antonio Breast Cancer Symposium. The study followed more than 500 women after surgery for early-stage cancer. All then spent at least 18 months taking hormone-blocking drugs. The women stopped their treatment for up to 2 years to get pregnant, deliver, and breastfeed, and then they restarted cancer therapy. After 3 years, about 9% saw cancer came back, similar to the rate seen in a set of women in a separate study who stayed on hormone-blocking therapy.
Who's next?
Hundreds of journalists and other employees at the New York Times began a 24-hour walkout on Thursday, the first strike of its kind at the newspaper in more than 40 years. Newsroom employees and other members of the News Union of New York said they are tired with bargaining that has dragged on since their last contract expired on March 2021. The union announced last week that more than 1,000 employees will stage a 24-hour work stoppage unless the two sides reach a contract deal. Negotiations took place on Tuesday and Wednesday, but the sides remained far apart on issues including wage increases and remote work policies. Now we move on to other topics. In Bolivia, the implementation of a drought immediate response plan has begun. This phenomenon affects 153 municipalities in 8 of the country's 9 departments. This rainfall shortage is expected to last until the first quarter of the next year. From La Paz, our correspondent Freddy Morales with the details.
With 4 ministries of state responsible for executing the so-called drought immediate response plan.
There is going to be rainfall, but it will be scarce, and in many municipalities it will be quite scarce, which will cause a drought and will have an impact on production and also on food security. Comrades, in this sense, the President has formed a cabinet for this emergency, the cabinet to fight against the drought.
The emergency plan began in La Paz Altiplano with the distribution of water storage tanks, pipes and tanker trucks to the municipalities suffering from the lack of rainfall.
With the supply of water for human consumption, water for irrigation, water to recover the production, brothers and sisters of a Bolivian Altiplano, and also water for animal consumption and for our livestock activities.
The plan calls for the drilling of wells and the construction of water cutoffs for harvesting and storage.
This crisis obviously has a background. Not only the consequences of an excessive deforestation, but also the global phenomenon that is part of a merciless capitalism that in the name of globalization, in the name of the use and abuse of our natural resources, is affecting the environment.
The emergency plan foresees an immediate investment of $4 million in the first month and almost $30 million up to the first quarter of the next year. According to the weather forecast, the lack of rainfall will last until March of next year. 153 municipalities in 8 of the 9 departments are under the state of emergency due to the damage caused by the drought.
Freddy Morales, TeleSUR, Bolivia.
And the government of Portugal declared a state of alert in Lisbon, its capital city, since at least 1 person died due to the heavy rains pouring over the country. The National Emergency Commander of Civil Protection, André Fernandes, urged the population to stay home until Thursday, a date to which the state of alert is expected to be enforced. Fernandes also urged citizens living in low-lying areas to seek shelter in safer places. Civil Protection reported that the rains flooded streets, train stations, and hospitals. Chinese President Xi Jinping and Qatari Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani discussed the ongoing FIFA World Cup in Qatar during their talks on Friday. The Chinese head of state wished the World Cup a complete success, saying the Qatar's successful hosting of the Games, which demonstrated the nation's competence, has injected fresh and positive energy into today's uncertain world. Meanwhile, the Qatari Emir thanked President Xi Jinping for his good wishes for the World Cup, stating that the world today needs the Games to learn about the abilities and spirit of the Arab world. He also noted that Chinese companies built the main stadium for the World Cup Cup, emphasizing it became a new name card for the friendship between Qatar and China. And China on Thursday denounced another planned sale of aircraft parts to Taiwan by the U.S., urging it to stop creating new factors of tensions.
China urges the U.S. to abide by the One China principle and the provisions of the three joint communiques, earnestly put into practice the commitment made by the U.S. leader not to support Taiwan independence, stop selling arms to Taiwan and U.S.-Taiwan military ties, stop creating new factors of tension in the Taiwan Strait, stop using Taiwan to contain China, and stop going further down the wrong and dangerous path.
And we have more news coming up after a final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back. On Thursday, a shipment of Ebola vaccine candidates to be used in a clinical trial has arrived in Uganda. Health Minister Jane Ruth Eisen and the WHO Uganda Incident Manager attended a ceremony to receive the doses. Even though the outbreak is seemingly waning with no new cases reported recently, Eisen remains cautious. According to WHO criteria, an Ebola outbreak ends when there are no new cases for 42 consecutive days. There are currently no licensed vaccines for the Sudan strain of the virus. Therefore, the first batch of one of the 3 vaccine candidates will be evaluated during the Tokomeza Ebola clinical trial. And the M23 rebels killed at least 131 civilians in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo on November 29th to 30th, according to preliminary findings the UN mission in the country said. Authorities in Kinshasa had said that some 300 people, almost all civilians, had died in M23 attacks in the village of Kizije in the eastern North Kivu province. The group had denied it had blamed stray bullets for the deaths of just 8 civilians. The UN's MONUSCO Commission said the victims were killed as part of reprisals against the population, and also said that 102 men, 17 women, and 12 children were arbitrarily executed by bullets or other weapons and 60 others kidnapped. At least 22 women and 5 girls were raped. This violence was carried out as reprisals from the clashes between the M23 and other groups, the statement said. A new report from the World Health Organization, the WHO, says the coronavirus pandemic disrupted efforts to control malaria, resulting in 63,000 additional deaths and 13 million more infections worldwide in 2 years. The report, released on Thursday, adds that cases of the disease increased in 2020 and continued to rise in 2021, although at a slower pace. New challenges include a new invasive mosquito species resistant to many pesticides, but the biggest hurdle remains funding. Africa remains the continent most affected by malaria. According to the UN, there were 619,000 malaria deaths last year and an estimated 247 million infections. 95% of this occur in Africa. For the 9th time, Lebanon's parliament failed to elect the nation's president. At the meeting held on Thursday, independent parliament member Michael Mouad received 39 votes. The same number of deputies submitted blank ballots, 4 ballots were annulled, and the rest of the deputies voted for other candidates. 105 legislators of a total of 128 participated in the meeting, while the president of the parliament, Nabi Berri, called a next meeting to vote for the president's candidacy for next December 15th. The legislature has been trying to elect a new head of state since the end of September, but none of the candidates has yet obtained 2/3 of the required votes. In Damascus, orphan children recovered their joy at a Christmas party organized for the holiday season by the Syrian charity Izaf Orphanage, which takes them in and cares for them after they lost their parents and families because of the terrorist war imposed on their country. Let's see.
Daily life imposed by the rigors of war and the blockade to get into the Christmas spirit and the optimism necessary for these children, an activity that ISAF Orphanage is grateful for. It was achieved thanks to the cooperation of the Russian Cultural Center in Damascus, the Russian Center for Reconciliation in Syria, and the Chechen Charity Association Kadyrov.
This activity on the occasion of the Christmas season aims at bringing joy to the children of the orphanage, who we consider an essential part of society, and we achieve this thanks to the valuable material and spiritual contribution of the Russian Cultural Center and the Chechen Charity Association Kadyrov that mark a special presence in most of the activities of this nature developed by different associations of the civil society of the country. In the midst of the difficult situation facing this friendly nation, we developed as a cultural center several and varied activities, including work with children to help them in different aspects, and we do it with the cooperation of the Syrian civil society associations. And this event today on the occasion of Christmas is part of this work.
Some 115 orphans depicted in the pictures I drew during the event, all the joy that motivated them to celebrate this holiday. Even when they cannot celebrate this with their families, they are full of enthusiasm and hope to be able to share with their teachers from the orphanage and their friends from Russia and the Chechen Republic.
A strong relationship of friendship binds our two countries that both suffer from the unjust sanctions that in the case of Russia might not have much effect, but undoubtedly negatively affect the Syrian society, and that is why we work together to overcome the repercussions of these sanctions and to restore security and achieve peace, and today's Christmas activity is an example of this. The drawings of these children show their joy for the Christmas gifts we have offered them today in an atmosphere of joy and positive energy. And this activity is part of the humanitarian work we have been carrying out in Syria for 6 years, including the delivery of humanitarian food and medical aid to IDPs, hospitals, and orphanages.
Christmas gifts did not delay. The organizers of the party argued that the children of Syria, despite the difficult situation they live in because of the war and blockade, have the right, like their peers in the rest of the world, to celebrate Christmas and dream of a better new year.
Hisham Wannous, TeleSUR, Damascus, Syria.
And just as the hearts of millions of fans live the emotions of the Qatar 2022 World Cup, TeleSUR joins this sporting event with From the Field, a show that brings news, analysis, reviews, and more to our audience. Don't miss it. Our show airs 1 p.m. local time in Caracas and 12 p.m. New York. Remember, From the Field, only on TeleSUR. And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media for all the latest news. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. For TeleSUR English, I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.
In a world